Okay, I think I'll be giving it a start. We might still have more attendants coming in, but this allows me to just give some introductory words. I'd like to welcome all of you, ladies and gentlemen, to this, what is the seventh webinar that we have this year from EPRC. My name is Liliana Fonseca, and I am a research associate at the EPRC. We are delighted to be able to welcome you all from a bit all over the world in this webinar today, and hopefully for future webinars as well. Today, we welcome Professor Kevin Morgan from Cardiff University, who will be sharing his research on the topic of post-Brexit regional policy in Wales. The presentation will last between 20 and 30 minutes, and in the remaining time, we will open the floor for questions and comments from the audience. And of course, if you would like to make an intervention, you can use the Zoom raise a hand function, or feel free to use the chat function as well. And after the presentation, we will address these in the Q&A. Before introducing our speaker, I would also like to inform you that this meeting is being recorded, which means that you and your colleagues have the opportunity to follow the meeting at a later stage. The recording will then be made available on our YouTube channel and shared with you by email. And we would also like to encourage you, of course, to use Twitter to share your thoughts on the webinar and follow our page at EPRC _EU. So let me present our speaker today. Kevin Morgan is Professor of Governance and Development in the School of Geography and Planning at Cardiff University, where he is also Dean of Engagement. Place-based policy is one of his core research interests, and he is actively engaged with place-based policy in practice communities in Wales, the UK, and the EU. He is currently a member of the Scientific Committee of European Commission's Joint Research Council, where he is a part of a team working on the Partnerships for Regional Innovation Program, which is the new generation of EU regional innovation policies. I would thus like to give the floor to Professor Morgan. Please go ahead. You can start your presentation.
Many thanks, Liliana. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. And I'd just like to thank Liliana and Marie at EPRC for the kind invitation to join you all this morning. What I'd like to do is to begin by setting some political context for the debate around regional policy in the UK and in Wales.
Kevin, if I can just ask you to put your presentation on full screen.
Yeah. Is that better?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. I'd like to begin by setting some political context for the debate about regional policy. And I want to compare three regional policy repertoires. Then I'll go on to talk about the challenges of governance within Wales, and then finally the challenges of governance between Wales and Westminster and Whitehall, and then draw some conclusions. So beginning with political context first, and I'll run through these things rather quickly to leave time for discussion later. So each of these bullets, of course, we could spend all day discussing, but we haven't got all day, so I'll be pretty cavalier just mentioning them. So in terms of the post-Brexit political context, I think it's fair to say that it's really unnerved Welsh Government and its partners in the public, private and third sectors, the partners that are involved with Welsh Government in the regional policy community, as it were. Why is that? Simply because Welsh Government's original position, which it was encouraged to take, of course, by the promises that were made during the Brexit referendum, could be summed up by the political mantra, not a penny less, not a power lost. That was the original bargaining position of Welsh Government. And that position was wholly shattered by the Conservative government's response, particularly what I call the new centralism, which I'll look at in a moment. Because the new centralism is a really radically different kind of strategy from Westminster and Whitehall, compared to what we were used to during the first 20 years of devolution, which has been sometimes summarized as devolve and forget, that Whitehall departments were devolving powers in terms of the reserved model of devolution, and largely allowed the devolved administrations to sort of get on with it, as it were. So the new centralism signals this radically different stance from central government. And it's summed up best of all, I think, in the UK's Internal Market Act, UKEMA, as it's known. Why is that? Simply because this act, in a sense, empowers central government to intervene in quite unilateral ways across the whole suite of devolved subject matters. And Welsh government has taken the view that this kind of signals a kind of de facto weakening, neutering even, of devolved policy-making competences. And Welsh government has felt so strongly about this that it's tried to get a judicial review of the act. Initially, it's failed, but it hopes to come back again, as it were, a point we can discuss later. So in terms of the regional policy repertoires that I've mentioned here, what we see going on right now, to my mind anyway, is not just an interplay, but a collision of regional policy repertoires. The legacy of EU policy, the rise of the new UK policy in terms of the Shared Prosperity Fund, and then the new Welsh regional policies, place-based policies from within Wales, which I'll look at in a moment. In terms of the legacy of EU regional policy, this is important, it seems to me, because this was a regional policy repertoire which the entire UK policy community was weaned on, as it were. And whatever the shortcomings of EU policy, and we know those shortcomings very well in terms of over-regulation, bureaucratic straitjackets, as it were, difficult compliance and audit cultures, those things are well known. But it's important to remember that EU regional policy was also based on some fundamental principles of good practice place-based policy. Many of us will know these very well, so I'll just highlight them. You know, the concentration of resources, the multi-annual programming of resources aligned to EU priorities, the multi-scalar and multi-stakeholder collaboration, so that all levels of the multi-level polity felt it had some ownership level because it had been consulted and its local knowledge had been respected and validated in that process of identifying priorities. And then additionality, of course, whereby EU funds were always designed to be additional to, rather than a substitute, a surrogate for national regional policy. So we knew these principles very well. So how does the UK policy stack up? Well, the UK policy, Shared Prosperity Fund, as we call it, was ostensibly supposed to be a replacement for EU funds, but it falls short, the regional policy community in Wales feels, across the board. In terms of concentration, the quantum falls short by over £700 million, according to Welsh Government. The programming period contrasts from a 7-year EU programme to what, in effect, has become a 2.5-year SPF programme with no guarantee at all of funding beyond 24-25. With respect to partnership, this has been conspicuous by its absence, as I'll show in a moment. And in terms of additionality, Welsh Government has signally refused to contribute to, let alone match, the UK regional policy funds, simply because it was denied any role in designing the Shared Prosperity Fund, which seems to me to be an eminently reasonable position to adopt. For those of you who want to see the figures, these are the calculations that Welsh Government have produced to establish the shortfall of spending between the two EU and UK policy regional policies. Moving quickly on to the regional policy repertoire in Wales. Regional policy in Wales is being reinvented, being overhauled in quite significant ways. We've seen the rise of 4 new development regions as a result of the rise of city deals and growth deals. And these new development regions are basically aggregations of local authorities, and they vary enormously in terms of their maturity and in terms of their capacity. The most developed being the Cardiff capital region in southeast Wales, and I guess mid Wales, based on Ceredigion and Powys, would be the least developed in terms of capacity. The region, CCR region, the Cardiff capital region, has been experimented with new forms of place-based policy, new forms of regional policy, not just based on the usual suspects of knowledge economy, triple helix approaches, as it were, but also introducing foundational economy sectors, adult social care, food, water, other utilities, as being part of place-based quality of life, as it were. And this new policy is jarring to some extent with a dominant model of development, which is based on the Treasury-imposed GVA uplift model of economic development that we're all familiar with. We can discuss these models later on, but moving on to the governance challenges as a result of these clashes of new policies, I want to draw this simple distinction between 2 models of devolution. The national model, which we know and more familiar with, has been the traditional model of devolving functions and powers from London to Wales. And it's embodied in the institutions of the Senedd, the Welsh Parliament, and Welsh Government. But more recently, we've seen the advent of a new model of devolution, which I call this simply the subnational model. And this is devolution not to Wales, but within Wales, as regionalism begins to find its voice in the 4 development regions. And this subnational model has been energized, I would argue, by the fact that London government seems to prefer to deal directly with the local authorities, in effect bypassing Welsh government. And this is creating a new set of tensions in the UK. The political challenges of these new governance models have fueled 2 major political challenges. First, around the national model, we see intergovernmental relations between Cardiff and London reaching an all-time low, where it's often marked more by conflict than collaboration. I would suggest that the conflict is more acute at the political level than it is at the civil servant level, because civil servants have managed to build on relationships to try to negotiate the political conflicts. As regards the subnational model, we are seeing wholly new tensions emerging. And when I say the national versus subnational model here, I mean the national model referring to Wales, not the UK. So we're seeing new tensions between the national and subnational levels in Wales as the Welsh government struggles to deal with the advent of these new players from below, as it were. And secondly, we are also seeing new tensions between the new regional level of the 4 regions and local authorities, a tension I call between localism and regionalism, because the Shared Prosperity Fund has allocated funds to local authorities, to the local level, which tends to undermine the regional working culture that was supposed to flow from the city and growth deals. Let me illustrate that in 2 ways, both models. In terms of the intergovernmental tensions between Cardiff and London, I think the lack of partnership between these 2 levels of governance has been most acute in UK government's plan for Wales, shown here, because many civil servants that I've worked with and discussed with have commented on the fact that they felt that not a single conversation, not a single serious conversation occurred between London and Cardiff in the design of this strategy. So this is a far cry from the partnership working model that was deemed essential by the recent OECD review of multi-level governance in Wales. So that's the Cardiff-London tensions. And turning to the local regional tensions, let me just give one example. These were the SPF and multiply allocations to the 4 development regions. And this is deceptive the way it's presented, because if we take just Cardiff to illustrate the point, of this 278 million plus allocation to the region, the Cardiff capital region assumed that it would get around 20% of this take to fulfill regional-wide priorities that had been agreed in recent years. They assumed they'd get around 20%. In effect, they barely got 2%. In fact, they didn't even get 2% of the money. So the money was allocated entirely almost to local projects, which may be understandable enough because local authorities have been denuded of resources under 10 years of austerity, and therefore they clearly felt, you know, our time has come, we have the money now. The issue is, do they have the capacity to design and deliver those projects against an incredibly difficult timeline, which we can talk about later. The timeline is so short that it's almost as if local authorities are being set up to fail. Moving to the wider political implications of this, I make this quote from Mark Drakeford, our First Minister in Wales, because Mark Drakeford is an avowed unionist. He is totally committed to the union of the United Kingdom. And yet to see a politician of Drakeford's caliber making a statement like this, that the union that as it is currently constituted is over, is quite a moment, I think, in the history of United Kingdom politics. And it's almost entirely triggered by what Drakeford calls the aggressive unilateralism, or what I call the new centralism of the United Kingdom government under Boris Johnson. The Welsh position has been very, very elaborately laid out in this document, where Drakeford and his government explain the problems with the new centralism, how it's based on this form of aggressive unilateralism, which is embodied above all in the Internal Market Act, as I mentioned earlier, and how Drakeford himself argues that the central government hasn't really caught up with the new regime of 4 nations constituting the United Kingdom. And therefore, unless we see a change of attitude from the central government, then the territorial integrity of the United Kingdom is threatened in more ways than one. So I conclude then by looking at the emerging political scenarios in Wales, one with the Labour Party embracing what it calls a new form of radical federalism, still committed to the United Kingdom, but looking for much more radical forms of devolution within the UK. And then the Plaid Cymru development as a result of its Independence Commission, making the case for an independent Wales. And although there's still a clear minority of people who support independence, when you break down the arguments by cohort and look at the voting intentions of young people, we see that young people are much more, have a warmer attitude to independence than their older peers. So the polling can be more dynamic and more unpredictable than the conventional wisdom would lead us to suggest. So I conclude with this point, that the new politics of the United Kingdom is being fueled by many issues, but the new regional policy is right at the heart of them. And I'll stop there, Liliana. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. That was actually, we have a lot to talk about even after your presentation, because there were a lot of things that we could follow up on. And I would just invite people to come in to ask questions as we open the Q&A section now. Maybe you can stop sharing your screen, Kevin, so we can see all the participants. Thank you. Is there anyone that would like to come in? Oh, I think, yes, David wants to ask a question. Go ahead.
Hi, Kevin. Very interesting, and I hadn't kept up with all of the developments in Wales recently, but I was aware there was a lot of concern about the way things are going. But I think that concern is shared with other parts of the UK as well, at the way in which this current government has been developing its regional policy. But I suppose the question I would be asking is this part of a general tendency away from the sort of devolution settlement we've had over the last couple of decades, or is it simply a rogue government which is likely to collapse at any time in the next couple of years, and therefore it's a bit of an aberration? If as we expect, this government is going to be gone within 2 years, what comes after may be quite different. So, is there something about this which has a longer term generic issue here, or is it an aberration, and hopefully we move on to something more sensible?
Many thanks, David. Excellent question, and the answer is we don't know. If it's a rogue government, and then we see a return to what we might call, how would we characterize business as usual? I hope it's not devolve and forget again, because that's not the way to cement a union of 4 nations in an inspiring or compelling way. It was almost neglecting or ignoring the 3 Celtic nations in the past. So we need something a bit more compelling than that if we're going to stitch the UK together and reinvent it, it seems to me. So that's the rogue argument, that Johnson was a rogue prime minister. He's been succeeded by if there is such a word, even a roguer replacement. And at the moment, of course, it looks like she's not going to survive 2 years, in which case we may see, if it's a Starmer government, I still don't know exactly how to characterize Starmer, to be honest. For me, he's too coy about these fundamental issues. Personally, I'd like to see him embrace radical federalism with much more alacrity than he seems to at the moment, in which case then the new centralism gets removed, but we still have an agenda and question mark. How do we reinvent the United Kingdom as a union of 4 nations in the context of radical devolution? So your question, a good one. I don't know the answer. I don't know if anyone knows the answer, but the rogue government argument would certainly temper the new centralism. If that makes sense, David.
Yes, Annie Saunders, please go ahead.
Hi, Kevin. Thanks for your presentation. Yeah, it was, I suppose, it's a sort of, although accurate, quite a gloomy picture of the sort of political context of Wales and UK more widely. But I was wondering, perhaps, within this gloomy context, are there sort of more positive or more progressive things happening within Wales that we could maybe sort of outline or emphasize? Because I think maybe there are some good things happening as well.
Thanks, Annie. I agree. There's lots of good things happening in Wales. I mean, the 4 regions, for example, shows that devolution doesn't stop in Cardiff Bay, that the principle of subsidiarity is informing the debate about governance within Wales, and we need to see more devolution to those regions, it seems to me. And of course, this is not easy for Welsh government, as we see at the moment. I mean, I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of those 4 regions, but they are transitioning to what we call corporate joint committees. And that transition is not going as smoothly as any of us hoped and believed it would. The point is, I think these 4 regions are here to stay, but we need to build up institutional capacity to allow them to be able to deliver the policies that they are responsible for. Because at the moment, we see a real disconnect between what they're responsible for and their capacity to deliver. In the case of Cardiff Capital Region, as I mentioned, they have formally committed to embracing the foundational economy, which is a major step forward to my mind, because it includes those parts of the economy that have been excluded from official regional policy in the past. And that's not been an easy sell for Cardiff Capital Region vis-a-vis Treasury, because the Treasury is instinctively suspicious of any model that doesn't that isn't aligned with the GVA, what it calls the GVA uplift model, a narrow base of GVA per capita. So the social economy, the foundational economy are positive things to my mind, but they're not easy to get past the Treasury in terms of gateway reviews of the city deal. So yeah, sorry it was a bit gloomy, but yes, there are lots of good things going on in Wales, but unless we can address this issue of resourcing and getting resources behind our well-being legislation, then we'll always have this disconnect between aspirational policy in Wales, which is laudable, and an inability to deliver on it because of lack of resources and lack of capacity. And that's my biggest worry about where we're at the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, both Annie and David, for your questions. I see we have a few more now. Nigel, I believe you were first, so please go ahead and unmute.
Thank you, Kevin, for a fascinating talk. I found it really interesting. I was slightly tantalised by the slide you showed right at the end of the Labour Party document entitled Radical Federalism. And I know that the Welsh Liberal Democrats have also been interested in federalism. Is there a growing interest in federalism in Wales? And if so, could that be the answer to some of the problems that you've outlined, do you think?
Thank you, Nigel. I wish there was more interest in it. This is a what you might call a new policy direction from what I'd call Welsh Labour. The Labour Party in Wales for decades, frankly, ever since the Second World War, has really been split into 2 factions. What you might call British Labour, represented by Neil Kinnock, for example, and then Welsh Labour, which was represented by people like Ron Davies, Rhodri Morgan, and now Mark Drakeford, of course. And radical federalism comes out of the Welsh Labour faction of the Labour Party, and they've got a hard sell to sell that to their British MP, to the Welsh MPs. It's worth saying, of course, that, you know, as my colleagues in Cardiff, Richard Wynne-Jones and others have shown, the Welsh Labour Party is quite a unique political phenomenon, and we don't always appreciate this. You know, this year it's marking, I should say, rather than celebrating, 100 years of electoral dominance. There's not another party in the democratic world, Richard Wynne-Jones and his colleagues argues, which has a century of electoral dominance under its belt. You know, we think of the Christian Democrats in Bavaria, we think of the Swedish Social Democrats, the PD, the Democrats in Emilia-Romagna, but nothing comes close to the dominance of the Labour Party in Wales. So this is quite an extraordinary achievement. particularly when we've had relative economic decline, and yet Labour has maintained its electoral dominance. It's an intellectual curiosity to my mind. But going back to your question, Nigel, I think this policy is coming out of Welsh Labour. It's Welsh Labour's response to the challenges of the union, thinking beyond this, what David Charles nicely referred to as a rogue government. And that's the pitch that it's making to try to cut the ground from underneath Plaid Cymru, which, as I say, it's Yes Cymru movement is quite appealing to many young people, and radical federalism is Welsh Labour's answer. That's as much as I can say, Nigel. I'm not sure how far that resonates with the voting public.
Sorry, you're muted, Nigel. I don't know if you want to follow up. I think if you don't want to follow up, Nigel, I think you're still muted.
No, I'm sorry, I was muted. I just wanted to say that that was a very helpful answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Now I'll move on to Malcolm Leach to ask his question.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Kevin, for a very, very interesting presentation. It's always a delight to hear your wisdom at events such as this. So I'm Malcolm Leach. I'm Economic Development Manager with Glasgow City Council, but I'm also the SLADE, which is the Local Authority Economic Development Group, sort of spokesperson, if you want to put it, on EU and UK funds. So a lot of what you were saying struck a very, very close chord with me at the operational level, because I would say, first of all, before I go into my substantive comment, you know, our experience in practical terms with the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, it's been a dash to design, and it will be a dash to deliver. And one of the key things we are losing in the transition from an EU to a UK regional economic development policy is that the genuine multi-annual perspective that we had with the 7-year programming that characterized EU funds in the last several decades. So just even the delivery, we can argue about the sums of money, etc. That's a legitimate but separate argument, but just being able to deliver the sums of money that have been allocated sensibly and effectively within the time frame that we were allowed to do so is going to be a really major challenge, and I can't really emphasize that strongly enough. I was really interested in what you're talking about when you looked at sort of the regional partnership model in Wales. As you know, or some of you may know, there's a Scottish Government is looking at a review of sort of regional economic policy in Scotland. There's been a working group on which I've been representing SLADE. That work is all but complete, and we'll be expecting something to be published very, very soon. So I would commend anyone in this audience, I think, will be very interested to read that report when it comes out. Obviously, I won't say anything what's in it, because that's obviously under embargo until we reach that point. But the more general thing is, there's a genuine interest in Scotland looking at sort of making use of regional economic partnerships, and as in Wales, as you pointed out, there's the regional economic partnerships we have in Scotland are at varying degrees of maturity on that, and I think you mentioned that was a similar situation applied in Wales. But what I was wanting to question is, to what extent has this regional working been an aggregation of what individual local authorities used to do, being aggregated, and there could be efficiency reasons for doing so, or capacity reasons. So it's not to say it's a bad thing, but to what extent has there been actual genuine disaggregation, devolution downwards from the Welsh Government to these regional partnerships to actually take decisions and manage budgets independently of the Welsh Government? Because that's there's a similar debate, I think, to be had in Scotland. Is it just purely an efficiency model of aggregation, overcoming the capacity constraints because local authority budgets have been hammered for so long, etc.? These could be good, valid reasons, but is there really any genuinely sort of devolution of powers and budget from the Welsh/Scottish governments to these regional partnerships to do things differently within their patches? Sorry, it was a bit long-winded, but I think it's an important issue.
Yeah. Many thanks for that question, Malcolm, and good to see you here today. because I know your work very, very, very well, the work that you do also with Steve Fothergill
Absolutely.
and others in the Industrial Communities Alliance. And I salute you for that work. The question is very pertinent. I'm delighted, by the way, to see two colleagues here today, Alison and Baldwin, from Welsh Government. So I'm hoping I can tease them out to say something, because they are literally the real experts of what's going on inside Welsh Government. And I hope they're still talking to me as a result of my presentation today. My own take, Malcolm, would be this, that the four regions are very uneven in terms of their capacity. I do most of my work with the Cardiff capital region, where we're involved in partnership working on the new challenge-led place-based policies with them. And I would say, they are led by a very, very smart and charismatic director in the form of Kelly Byrne, who sits on the board of Research England. So she's very au fait with the nuances of place-based thinking in England, and she's led the diversification of place-based policy in Wales in terms of thinking of foundational economy and challenge fund and mission-based innovation. She's introduced these ideas at the CCR, at Cardiff capital region level. And of course, they've got their own budgets. Welsh Government sometimes criticises her for not spending the money quick enough. Getting the money out of the door was part of the old game of place-based policy, wasn't it? If you got the money out of the door in the set time period and you didn't end up in jail, well, that's what constituted success in that transactional way of thinking about policy. Kelly Byrne is a different animal. She's interested in transformational place-based policy rather than transactionalism. And this has created a new culture and some tensions as well between the regional level and Welsh Government level. I hope over time that will prove to be a creative tension, but sometimes it's difficult to see the creativity when you're in the eye of the storm, as it were. So there are, in answer to your question, Malcolm, there is some genuine new resource at the regional level. There are new powers and new functions. And when they evolve into corporate joint committees, there'll be the governance framework to really allow them to make more autonomous decision making. That will be a challenge for Welsh Government as well as for the regions, because as the OECD said, Welsh Government needs to devolve more and control less. And we haven't got that right balance in Wales yet, but Welsh Government, I believe, have played a really sterling role in trying to put together place-based coalitions in Wales, and that's been undermined by the new centralism. So I echo your remarks, Malcolm, about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm. Robert, please go ahead and unmute to ask your question.
Hi, I'm Robert Bowen from Cardiff Business School. Well, I've got an interest in sort of rural enterprise, and I guess my question sort of stems from that really. I was just wondering what your take was on the sort of the growth deals across Wales, or the city regions that have been developed. Looking at the map of Wales, obviously you talked a lot about the Cardiff capital region, and we could look at this as maybe being a natural city region in the way that it's set up, with Cardiff as a centre point of this, and sort of the transport system and travel to work areas feeding into Cardiff. But if we look at the other three regions that have been created in Wales, maybe we could look to question whether these would naturally be regions that would fit together. I mean, I talk about this as somebody who's from Carmarthenshire originally, and Carmarthenshire is obviously a very rural area that's been linked with Swansea, but doesn't really have a natural connection to Swansea in terms of transport links, travel to work areas, or people looking towards Swansea. I also, as somebody who lives currently in Aberystwyth, look at the Mid Wales growth deal and think, well, this isn't a city region as such. Obviously, we welcome investment and maybe the idea of devolution to the areas. But do you see maybe that, what's your take maybe on the way that the city regions or the growth deals have been presented, particularly with a view towards the rural areas within these places? Are they been forgotten somewhat, or are they something that's going to be really integrated into these regions?
Yeah, no, thanks, Robert, for that question. How can I put this? Well, let me put it without any nuance first. I think the rural question has been completely neglected by UK, Welsh, and other governments throughout the OECD for the last 25 years. Let me put it as stark as that. And I put it like that because I've said this, by the way, in a new report that was commissioned by Carmarthenshire County Council on the future of Carmarthenshire as a rural area in rural Wales, which I hope I can share with you if you're interested at some point. Let me try to justify that. Over the past 25 years in place-based thinking, the role of the city and then the city region, what you might call the new metros, the metropolitan agenda, has completely sidelined coastal towns, rural areas from the kind of spatial policy map, as it were. And as a result of the new economic geography, which has dominated international bodies all over the world, cities and city regions have been framed as the engines of economic development for their regions and their nations. Cities have been characterized, if you will, as the cavalry for place-based politics. So the rural area has been completely neglected. And the challenge now is how do we forge better connections between urban rural connectivity? I don't mean just in terms of technology and infrastructure, but in terms of how rural areas enter our mind space to think of sustainable development in a much more capacious way, where the rural has parity of esteem with the urban. That's the big challenge, it seems to me. And going to your point about Carmarthenshire, as I say, I've just done a big report with my colleagues, Dylan Henderson and Rick Delbridge, on the future of rural Wales. And we need to address this issue with more attention than it's received to date, because Mid Wales is not well resourced to be a growth region on its own. And we need to really attend to that issue of institutional capacity and how do we resource the new development regions in Wales. That's what I would say is the key issue, Robert. But it needs to be understood in this wider context that rural areas have been dreadfully neglected in development thinking for many, many years.
Yeah, thanks very much for your answer. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see the report that you've done. And I guess I know that we're talking about Wales here, but I guess your comments apply across regions across the UK and elsewhere as well. So it's interesting to see the role of the rural and how that's dealt with.
Thank you, Robert. One thing that we can do, Kevin, if you want to share any publications, just send them to us, and then we can also share them with attendees when we share the link to the recording. Now, I know that you mentioned there were some people here from Welsh Government that maybe we could tease out to provide some comments, Bodwin and Alison. So if you want to come in, please go ahead now. Hi, Bodwin, I see you turned on your camera.
Yes, I think Alison's been more involved with the OECD work with the regions, but from an operational level, I've been involved with the city deals, their match funding, some of the European funding we're putting in. So they have funding and they are spending it. Now, what are the constraints? I mean, they do have constraints. They have to seek approval from, I think I counted something like 6 different bodies for every project. There's Welsh Government, UK Government, every local authority, the local authorities when they come together. So it's a fairly complex process. But that is, that has identified certain priorities in each region, which I think is useful, and a focus for UK government to see what the potential is of these regions. There's obviously some planning going on in the different regions. In particular, they're working out their low carbon, zero carbon energy plans, which will then feed into Welsh Government, because obviously these will be delivered through the regions as well as with Welsh Government. And I'm aware of a secondment, for example, to the Cardiff City region from Welsh Government, so there is some thought as to resourcing. But in other cases, they are just setting up new delivery and policy areas for the joint local authorities. So, for example, in North Wales, there's a growth deal commitment to carry out community energy. So they're having to set up a community energy team and a program from scratch between the different local authorities. There's clearly some a varied sort of patchwork of different capacities across the different areas. I'm speaking from North Wales, Llandudno, so some of these comments about the rural-urban interface resonate. Obviously, there are areas of specialism that require development and have great potential in rural areas, and yet also we do need to link into the cities, because we need the opportunity to commute to Liverpool or Manchester, which currently is not really possible by train from my neck of the woods anyway. So I think part of this is also getting a common narrative together about what the priorities are, and then taking that to the funders in a positive way, instead of a begging bowl. It is having an understanding between all the stakeholders of what the potential of the area is to contribute to government policy.
Thank you, Bodwin. What I would suggest, I think Alison just wrote she's having some issues with the microphone, but maybe we can get a comment from Alison, and then we can have a comment from you, Kevin. Alison, are you able to come in? If not, also feel free to write something in the chat. But yes, I think she's having some trouble with her microphone. You can come in, Kevin, if you want. Yeah. I think there's another question as well from David. Okay, yeah, David, please go ahead.
Yeah, it's really just a comment, I suppose, just to reinforce the point about the difficulties of fragmentation in other parts of the UK as well, particularly around the implementation of the SPF. You know, if you take the example of the North East, in the north of Tyne combined authority with Newcastle, North Tyneside and Northumberland, at least there's some degree of some coordination and a link in between the sort of urban and rural dimensions there. So there's some possibilities of a more strategic approach. But because the south of Tyne, Gateshead, South Tyneside, Sunderland, didn't join into that combined authority in the first instance, then it makes it impossible to do any kind of coordinated actions using the SPF at the moment, because everything's devolved down to that local authority level. So even though Newcastle and Gateshead effectively share a city centre, they can't collaborate through the SPF, which is totally crazy. Now, hopefully that will be resolved if a new combined authority is developed, which includes both north and south of Tyne, which is under discussion at the moment. But at the minute, the lack of coordination around the SPF in the region is just horrendous. The universities can't work together in terms of delivering joint programs because they're all in different local authorities. You know, it just makes life really difficult to do more strategic activities other than small scale capital projects, which, you know, that seems to be the model. Anything more strategic and regional is just far too difficult to try and deliver.
Sorry, I think I was on mute. Do you want to comment on that, Kevin, on any of the comments from Bodwin or David?
No, just simply to echo what both of them have said, and particularly what David said now about the fragmentation of the development process, which makes it much more difficult to have impactful or consequential projects at any level above the local level. And the timeline on this project effectively being a 2.5-year funding, where when I talk to local authorities, they all tell me the same kind of thing, that it's almost impossible to design and deliver projects with impact in this kind of time frame. And therefore one wonders, you know, how can you think seriously about regional development when you're imposing those kind of barriers on public bodies and their partners? So, you know, I honestly despair of how difficult it is for local level, and then the regional level, as I say, has been undermined in my view by the what I call the hyper-localism of the SPF allocation. So we've got a lot of work to do to try to change this development model. And as David said, hopefully we won't be dealing with a rogue government for much longer.
Thank you, Kevin. I see there's a comment from Malcolm in the chat. It's more like 2 rather than 2.5 years to deliver the UK SPF. I also see that Alison has rejoined us, and maybe she wants to try now to come in.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Ah, great. Okay, I can't get my screen to work though, so I'm going to have to be my identity sort of hidden, my visual identity is hidden. So apologies for that. But I don't know. I've had to leave obviously the room and then come back in, and still the video, you know, is not working. But yes, you know, first of all, thank you to Kevin for his, you know, independent sort of view of what's happening in Wales. He's obviously, you know, been a member of our regional steering group, which has been chaired by, you know, our member of the Senedd, Hugh Ranker-Davies, for many years, and has, you know, input, you know, significantly into the development of our regional investment framework for Wales, which was the model for, you know, replacement EU funding in Wales, developed obviously with our partners. So, and obviously he's been, you know, an expert and a panel member on the OECD work, and continues to do that. So, you know, thank you very much for your presentation, Kevin, first of all. Just to reiterate really some of the points, we are, you know, the Welsh Government is in, you know, we are in challenging times here in terms of, you know, replacement EU funding, and with the way that the other, you know, some of the other UK government funds are being delivered using the financial assistance powers of the Internal Market Act. You know, as you know, in terms of the Shared Prosperity Fund, we have calculated that we are £1.1 billion worse off. You know, less funding than we would have received or benefit from in terms of, you know, the current EU funding programs. So that's obviously a significant, you know, shortfall against obviously other Welsh Government budget pressures. In terms of our Welsh budget overall is 4 billion, you know, less in real terms in the current spending review. So those, you know, pressures are significant. In terms of, you know, we haven't had any input or into the design of the, you know, Shared Prosperity Fund. We haven't had any, you know, we have no, you know, co-decision making role in that fund. We've also been denied access to the funding. You know, so in terms of our situation, we've, you know, we were funding obviously critical programs like Business Wales and the Development Bank for Wales, and apprenticeships, etc., with EU funding. So that's provided a, you know, significant dent in you know, with the Welsh Government budget that we do have. So, and also there's that, you know, the fact that the Shared Prosperity Fund doesn't support things like research and innovation. It has little sort of opportunity for the third sector to access, and you know, other way that the arrangements are being administered obviously pose significant, you know, pressures on the likes of the third sector, our higher education sector, and the, you know, further education sector and the third sector. And I think, you know, what we're trying to do now is obviously you know, work through these situations. We still want to keep the dialogue open with the UK government, to give them, you know, to have that opportunity for genuine co-decision making, and we're still pressing, you know, that with you know, UK ministers. But in the meantime, until that obviously happens, we're just working through the situation and trying to broker the, you know, conversations between local government and those sectors. So at least there could be some, you know, opportunities for those sectors in the future. But you know, from a Welsh Government perspective, we have worked, you know, quite successfully with the UK government recently on the likes of free ports, and we would like to see that kind of model of working replicated in other UK government funds, you know, like the Shared Prosperity Fund, like the Levelling Up Fund, and other funds they sort of come up with, as well as obviously the recent decisions around, you know, the investment zones. So we'd like to see that kind of model replicated in you know, in those, you know, in that kind of way forward. So I'll just stop there because I'm conscious of obviously time, but yeah, thank you to Kevin for his independent update on the situation in Wales.
Thank you very much, Alison. We are running up to the hour, but I would ask Kevin if he had any further comments that he'd like to make to round us up.
Not really, Liliana, other than to say two things really. First of all, the issues that I've tried to talk about, I don't see them as Welsh issues. These are issues for place-based policy everywhere, you know, internationally, about you know, how do you devolve power to a level, a local regional level, which is appropriate to delivering impactful policy, and that requires a multi-scalar coordination between national, regional, and local levels. That's a challenge for place-based policy makers everywhere, it seems to be. And secondly, the problems I've spoken about in Wales about fragmentation, resourcing, timelines, institutional capacity, these are also problems that are shared by other regions and cities throughout the United Kingdom. And therefore, you know, what we've talked about today, I think, has a much wider resonance than just talking about Wales. But I wanted to thank you, Liliana and Marie, for giving me the opportunity to discuss these issues, and to everybody for sparing a bit of time from busy schedules to join us today. Many thanks to everyone.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for accepting our invitation as well. And thank you to everyone for your interest in today's webinar. I will just say that our next webinar will be on November 16th on the role of universities in regional innovation policies, which I will present. So contact us to register for our mailing list and keep up to date on future events. And we hope to see you all again. So I hope you have a good day. See you then now. See you.